Okay, welcome to our next class on Jupiter-Pluto aspects. As always, let's start by tuning into the meaning of the Jupiter archetype. Jupiter corresponds to our understanding of reality. It's the way that we're interpreting experience and connecting that to a cosmological philosophical framework that enables us to understand more holistically what this is all about. So everyone, regardless of your orientation or belief system or religion or cosmology, no one is free of a cosmological orientation. Even the perspective, oh, I don't really think there's any meaning, that's a cosmological point of view. We're wired to make meaning out of life in order to understand essentially our place in it. At the core, the Jupiter function corresponds to how we're synthesizing all of our experiences and connecting it to a larger whole. We're going to intuitively sense the larger picture with Jupiter. We're going to intuitively sense there's something more holistic and comprehensive happening here beyond just all the details and the different components. And through the intuitive faculties, we're all going to have a certain knowing, right? A certain understanding that we won't be able to empirically explain how we have it, right? Implicit to the Jupiter archetype is knowing something without actually knowing why or how you know it. And thus also within the Jupiter archetype, it's not always easy to explain and communicate and convey that which you know. Because that which is known in non-empirical terms, intuitively, is just known. And this also relates to a very important facet within Jupiter, which is that which we know, that which is known, doesn't need to be believed. This is one of my favorite Jupiter teachings from Jeff Green. When you know something, there are two implications. One, you won't have any belief system because believing in something is literally to not know it, right? I don't believe I'm sitting on a chair. I know that I'm sitting on a chair. Very different energetics. And there will also be no need to prove anything. I know I'm sitting on a chair. You can tell me that I'm not, and that's fine. I'm not threatened by that. What we don't prove, what we don't need to convince others of, is because it rests inside as knowledge. It's direct experience, and that's irrefutable. It's actually only that which we don't truly know that we will then try to prove or convince or convey to other people based on a need to convince ourselves of it. So within the Jupiter archetype is often a general insecurity relative to one's cosmological or philosophical framework. I want to be right. I want to know that I understand what's going on. I want to know that I understand what life is all about, or my beliefs or my views, and it could be spiritual views, religious views, political views, what we think is true about anything. We can sort of go on a crusade of convincing and trying to convert other people to conform to our perspectives, our beliefs. But in all of those cases, that need to gain other people's conviction is just coming from our own lack of true actual knowledge. This is what takes me always back to the teachings of the Tao, that those who know don't speak, and those who speak don't know. It's a very Jupiter thing. I often give emphasis when teaching on Jupiter that Jupiter corresponds to the archetype of sincerity and honesty. And this is a very important thing to understand. In order to actually learn more and have more of a direct experience of reality, there needs to be an uncontrived mind that isn't already holding all of the answers. So if you're on a journey and you say, I know where I'm going and where it's supposed to be and what's supposed to happen, of course, we're not going to be open to experience. We're not going to be receptive to actually what the journey wants to bring us. The spontaneous insights, revelations, and interactions that will expand our framework of reality. To be on a pilgrimage is to not really know how it's going to go, but to know you're meant to walk it. And so that speaks to a basic quality of sincerity and open-mindedness and availability to learn, and not holding on very strongly to a lot of convictions and strong beliefs and ideas. Further, to have an insight, to have a direct insight and experience of reality, that present moment insight is always spontaneous. And it's really helpful to recognize that. Realization is a spontaneous experience because we're not trying to get realization, right? The very nature of insight or realization is it happens because there's space and availability for it to sort of open up and experience and receive and apprehend more of reality. But that happens in an uncontrived mind. So sincerity is incredibly important. We can also think of nature, which is reality, right? Like nature is nature. Even though I'm in a room right now, I'm never outside of nature. The laws of the Tao, the principles of reality are always operating. In being in nature, which can be outside, but it's really aligning with nature, the flow of nature, the flow of the Tao, one learns more about the way of reality. Right? So for many souls, this will be a strong affinity or relationship or orientation to the natural world, where through the Jupiter archetype, we're going to learn more about reality by experiencing reality. The more belief structures, the more belief systems and convictions and dogmas that we're putting onto our experience, the less we'll really be able to learn. And this within the Jupiter archetype is really what makes a differentiation between religions, group belief systems, more intellectually philosophical oriented frameworks of understanding reality, and learning about reality through nature, through plants, through long walks, right? Through experiencing what is. Progressively, the state of realization that occurs within Jupiter happens with less and less and less and less pre-existing construct. That's actually a thing for me personally. I'm a very Jupiter person, and we're just introducing Jupiter right now, but I'm a very Jupiter person. And in my learning of astrology, it's always been this way. I might read a little bit, enough for me to sort of grasp the essence, and then I've often found myself letting go of it or kind of putting it down for a while from reading a book or consuming some sort of educational content, maybe not coming even back to it ever, right? Or putting it down for a while and just experiencing it, right? It's almost as if the insight, the understanding is so universal, and I can grasp it, I can intuitively sense the truth of it, that it wants to be digested and assimilated. And we want to give ourselves experience and time for assimilation. If we're adding so much, it can easily become all these ideas that we don't actually know. And I care very deeply to know and not believe. I care very deeply to have a direct understanding and a direct insight, and not to add a lot more. So less is more with Jupiter in a real significant way. Less is more because it's about getting the principles of reality, understanding the basic laws and principles that are at play. And then we have the ability to teach and convey it. Within Jupiter, we have the teacher archetype. And this is about being able to communicate and share one's knowledge or understanding of reality, or whatever facet of reality. The key with Jupiter is to not get stuck in the subjectivity of one's individual realization. This is a very important thing to understand. The way that I will realize something and the particular cultural framework or construct within which I'm going to understand that is going to be very subjective. Right? The essential principle itself is a universal principle. But what we're doing with Sagittarius Jupiter is we're always going to be expanding upon our existing understanding of reality, not necessarily rendering our old understanding false, but just expanding upon it and seeing more of the truth. And it's a very personal process, right? My experiences in life are very different than your experiences in life. And so I'm going to be coming into my own realizations. And so it's important when conveying an understanding that there isn't any kind of dogma put around it that then alienates other people from their own path. Your path of learning and realization and discovery of truth is very unique, very individuated according to your soul journey and your orientation. And so the idea is teaching and conveying ideas that point to the moon. That's the idea. And if the words and the language are emanating and are carried by the vibration of authenticity and sincerity, it will carry that vibration and will likely convey and communicate these principles and these laws and these universal ideas. So the Jupiter archetype can correspond to anything. You know, we have how to win friends and influence people, business success, money and relationship, religion, philosophy, spirituality. Any area of life through the Jupiter archetype can be seen with more insight and perspective, and it doesn't really matter what topic or category we're looking at. It's kind of like Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. Where we apply the Jupiter mindset is where we're going to be extracting and interpreting and understanding and grasping universal law and principles. We might apply that in business, we might apply that in mechanics, but it's universal principles. And that's why the teaching experience within Jupiter, it doesn't matter what the specific topic is, because we're basically applying these universal principles through whatever specific topic or category or life work that we're talking about. Same thing with learning. Whatever topic we're learning, whatever we're studying, whatever we're exploring, that is the path of our ongoing revelation of truth. We can find the principles of reality in any place that we look. And the reason why this is so is because the principles of reality are any place that we look. And I often like to offer this perspective, which is a very helpful framework for understanding how Jupiter operates. The Sagittarius archetype squares the Pisces archetype. So Pisces Neptune is the truth, right? With a capital T. It's the truth. And you can't really talk about it. It just is. What we talk about is within Jupiter Sagittarius. What we talk about is our understanding and our interpretation of the truth, according to where we're at on our own soul journey and the way in which we're wired to internalize and interpret experience to further serve our own evolutionary growth. So if we're ever talking about it, it's going to speak to an ongoing expansion of insight as to what is fundamentally true, Pisces, Neptune, but it's always going to be expanding. We're always going to be gathering more insight and understanding and revelation, realization as to the nature of reality. Whereas Pisces, Neptune isn't about insight per se. It's about surrender. You surrender to the truth. So I find that distinction is very helpful for a lot of people in really grasping that when we're dealing with Jupiter, we are dealing specifically with our understanding and our interpretation. So I'll offer one more introductory point. When we're looking at the idea of interpretation, we're basically looking at the experiences of reality, and we're wanting to understand, okay, what does that mean? And it's helpful to appreciate that the way that we interpret something, it's not about the interpretation being right or wrong, because, again, from one point of view, it's always wrong, because it's going to be limited. Right? We're never gonna, every interpretation is gonna have a filter. Thus, it's really more about how does that interpretation serve in our ongoing evolutionary growth? Does it further enforce an existing dogma and conviction? Or does it help expand us and make us available for further insight and understanding of reality? That's an important piece here. So, looking at Pluto Jupiter, the evolutionary journey itself then constellates around our understanding of reality. And we're going to find two general archetypal dynamics here. where we have an existing philosophical cosmological framework of reality, which provides for the individual soul an immense amount of security. This is my belief, this is my religion, this is my outlook on reality, this is my political orientation, this is what I think God is, and I'm going to feel secure about that. And if that's threatened, if I'm talking to someone who has a different perspective or has had experiences that I haven't had, I might need to prove the validity and the rightness of my own knowing. I will feel disempowered. And we have to really appreciate, for a lot of Pluto Jupiter people, that disempowerment might very much be linked to lifetimes of spiritual or religious persecution, right? I was persecuted for, thinking something differently. So I'm going to feel very threatened or insecure relative to being told that I'm wrong, right? Or I'm going to feel this deep need to prove that I am right. Or I'm going to feel a deep charge in speaking against the corruption and the manipulation of existing belief systems and religions and things like that. There can be a deep sense of disempowerment relative to one's understanding of reality, and thus a need to prove one's rightness or disprove other people's beliefs and perspectives. We'll look, when we get into some example charts, some really interesting examples of that. An important thing to understand about Jupiter, Pluto, and this is probably one of the most important pieces that I'll share here, and I find this to be such a compassionate and helpful thing to understand. And Jeff Green writes about this in the Pluto book, and I really appreciate this perspective. It doesn't really matter whether someone is a theist, an atheist, whether they're orienting from a, evangelical Christian consensus reality, whether they're orienting from a more agnostic, philosophical, globalist point of view, whether they're a non-dualist, whether they, orient from a more devotional bhakti perspective. These are all different orientations to understanding life and reality and our relationship with it and our part within it. None of them are right. And this is, again, because reality, truth, Pisces, doesn't have a religion or a cosmology or perspective, okay? All of these different orientations or religious cosmologies, it's so beautiful to appreciate that it resonates with our soul program. Like, whatever it is we're here to work out or resolve, we're going to be drawn in a Plutonian kind of way to a particular philosophical orientation or religious orientation or shamanic orientation, right? Where that's going to offer a framework that we're going to osmose. The osmosis of that particular framework of reality is going to reflect us uncovering and awakening to an inner gnosis, a knowing that we have within ourselves that we haven't yet actually awakened to. Thus, a power of intuitive certainty, right? The power of our intuitive connection and ability to understand the truth, to understand more about reality, a strength of insight that we are wanting to awaken to within ourselves. In the same way, we might find ourselves deeply confronted or triggered by people that have really strong beliefs and convictions. Now, that can actually point back to where we feel weak within ourselves. I don't have the answers. I don't know the truth. I don't understand. Right? For example, we can feel a sense of inadequacy or weakness or disempowered relative to certain teachers that are teaching within the framework of particular spiritual or cosmological systems that we are drawn to understand. Right? We can be around an astrologer who is expressing some strength of certainty or knowledge, and that might bring up a sense of weakness or inadequacy, right? That can be responded to by then progressively becoming more and more concentrated in a Plutonian way on that particular teacher or on that particular system or cosmology in order to osmose that knowledge within oneself. The struggle in that, right, the pitfall within that, is if we're obsessed or looking on the outside towards a particular teacher or cosmological framework, we can easily give our power away to that, right? Where it becomes more about I want to be like that external symbol of knowing, but I'm not actually seeking that knowledge within myself. Right? It's a difference between putting on the robes and saying all the right words and all the things that profess some sense of insight and knowledge, but not actually having that knowledge. So remember that Jupiter corresponds to the salesperson archetype. Right? This is the archetype of someone who will sell you something, and they can be very convincing. But just as much, it's someone that can make an argument for something or present themselves as someone that they are actually not, professing knowledge that one doesn't actually have. This could be because we've associated power with a sort of intuitive knowledge and understanding. And that will crumble when it's revealed that there isn't actually a ground of true soul insight. The soul can become very corrupt or manipulative in the sense that they will lie and be dishonest in order to present themselves as knowing something that they do not. In the same sense, the power of argument or conviction, or what you're wanting other people to believe, can result in saying things just to prove that you are right, and using the methodology of, I'm going to convince others that I am correct, that my understanding is correct, that I am right, even if it means not being entirely honest with myself. And this is where we can really think about the Gemini polarity, right? Are the words that you're saying, are they honest? Are they true? Do you actually know what you're speaking about? Or are you just trying to prove yourself and win the argument, make your point? There's going to be a deep psychological weakness within Pluto Jupiter aspects where the soul is going to, by necessity, at certain points along the journey, cyclically face the limitations of their understanding. And if they're willing, truly willing, to accept that they don't have all the answers, that they haven't figured it out already, then they won't need to be defensive when they're confronted with the weakness of their own intellectual, philosophical framework. There can be a deep sense of being around other people that know more than you, right? That have had a deeper threshold of experience and knowledge, and to actually be humbled in the face of that. To realize, oh, there's so much more to reality that I have not yet understood. On a cyclic basis, there will be a need to kind of get to the bottom line and ask really deep questions, which might be very uncomfortable because we might not be willing to admit, I don't really know. I thought I knew, but that was just a sense of security and maybe an insight that I had a while ago, but isn't actually clear and true and evident to me right now. The need to get out of a belief system and come back to the freshness and the spontaneity of direct experience. And we'll see this in our examples. The difference between, someone that's preaching the word of God and it's something that they believe, that they knew, that they are convinced about. But you can tell where it's just a belief system versus the authenticity of present moment realization. With Pluto Jupiter, there needs to be the ability to die to what you know, to be willing to let it all go over and over and over again. I'm not right. I don't know. Right? Imagine a teacher, powerful teacher. People look up to this person as being a powerful professor, powerful teacher, a powerful guru, right? It can be very easy for that individual to become inflated with the power of being seen and known as someone that knows. But what if they don't know, right? What if they're asked a question and they don't know? The key is to acknowledge, I don't know. But it's not just I don't know, it's I don't know, and the knowledge starts now. Pluto Jupiter isn't ever going to stay in a disempowered state of not knowing, because the vibration of not knowing, it resonates with a sort of distance from experience. It's more about, I'm available to step into the field of my own soul, which knows. And I'm not going to control or contrive or need to already arrive there. I'm not going to try to attest to knowing something that I don't know. So it's, I do not know this. Let's see what's there. I'm open to experience. And that's, again, the Pluto experience is we're osmosing and drawing into our own soul something that will awaken the latent knowledge that we haven't already been in touch with. And when we get in touch with the edge of our own knowledge and our own experience, that becomes the edge of our spiritual awakening. That becomes the edge of where there is so much more to see that we haven't yet actually come to see or understand. It's a powerful place to be if the soul is truly willing to not already know. And believe it or not, that's one of the hardest things with Pluto Jupiter, is to break down the existing cosmological framework. It's so easy to fall into sort of dogmatic state. Let's look at it on the other end as well. Giving all of one's power away to a teacher, we can have situations with teachers where the Pluto Jupiter person is in relationship to a teacher where that teacher is abusing that individual. Right? Believe me, trust me, I'm right. And so the student is being disempowered. They're not being encouraged by this teacher type person or the cosmological practice that they're following to look inside for their answers. Or they're not being guided within for their own direct experience. They're being told to go without. So they're being told to give their own agency for direct realization to someone else. And when the Pluto Jupiter finds himself in that situation, it's literally just a matter of timing where through evolutionary necessity, that will come to a sort of head. Now, I don't know how it will come to a head. It can happen in many ways. The Jupiter-Pluto individual can find themselves living a lie, conveying and even teaching things that they don't actually know, right? And actually getting to a point where they feel deeply out of touch with their own integrity as a result. They might get to a point where they realize their own sense of disempowerment and will confront that teacher. We can have a situation where they are confronting the teacher that is supposed to be more powerful than them. And that experience will be a very powerful evolutionary gate where that Pluto-Jupiter individual will actually realize that they can trust their own soul. And the lesson here is to never, ever give your power away to someone else that knows more than you. Never give your power away to someone that knows what's the answer for you, knows what you should do. Because if it's not a direct experience and it's just a belief, there's no empowerment in it. And at some point, the Pluto-Jupiter archetype wants to take the soul into a deeply honest state where they can answer the question, why am I doing what I'm doing? Well, because this is my teacher, and because this will take me here and do this. How do you know? How do you know that that's true? Because how do you know? And it might be very difficult to get that sincere with oneself. Very, very difficult to get that sincere with oneself. Because there has to be enough of an interest in really looking at the truth of the present moment and not a belief system that we've told ourselves. If it needs any kind of justification or, clarification, if we have to convince ourselves of something or explain something, then we don't really know it. What is known is only that which is actually self-evident. And that which is self-evident requires zero explanation, zero proof, zero conviction. But can you see how hard it is? Relative to the security attachment patterns of Pluto, I'm holding on. I want to have that security of knowing. And if I don't know, then the issue here is I'm lost, right? The greatest point of insecurity relative to Jupiter is the archetype of the wanderer. I don't know where I'm going. I have no clue what's going on here. I don't know where I'm going. I can turn right, I can turn left. And that's different than the energy of the traveler or the spiritual seeker that's on the pilgrimage. The wanderer is lost. Wandering elicits this quality of aimlessness and drifting. And there isn't a guidance system here. There isn't an intuitive guidance system here. And to wander is to not know. is to not feel connected to one's intuitive faculties. And so thus the security pattern is to want to know. So the Pluto Jupiter can find themselves having cyclically really strong relationships and experiences with different religions, different spiritual teachers, different cosmological frameworks. And you can go into a particular, get into the, just to make up, to illustrate the nature of this, get into an Orthodox religion, then explore Kundalini yoga tradition, then explore Kriya yoga tradition, then get more into Sufism, then kind of shift entirely into a more like straight non-dual path and orientation, then get into chanting. All these different paths will elicit a unique experience, an angle through which we can understand and comprehend more reality. None of them hold the whole truth. None of them are the universal way. They're all going to offer a different angle and a different way in. From the Jupiter-Pluto perspective, what the soul's trying to do is extract the essence of it. Okay, that's dogma, that's religious conditioning, that's cultural stuff. What's the essence? I want to grab the essence of it, right? And be able to take that in. Once the essence is grabbed, there's no longer any evolutionary need to persist or continue within any particular path or modality, unless that path or modality, for whatever reason, still is holding some space or ground for ongoing direct experience. But the whole point, as per Pluto, is we get in, we get out, right? It's all about having experience, getting really close, osmosing, integrating, and then moving on to the next. And so it's important that we're always embracing that next journey, that next experience that's going to deepen our own ongoing realization. And as we do so, what makes the journey go slower is when we think we've arrived. The moment we think we've arrived is the moment things go a lot slower. And instead of cultivating a deeper internal from our soul knowledge and experience of reality, we stop learning. And it becomes, I figured it out, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life teaching you what I know. And that basically says you're climbing the mountain towards realization, and without even realizing it, you stopped climbing. And you found a nice plateau, and you set up shop there. And a lot of spiritual practices, teachings, or cosmologies rather, and teachers will orient in that way. That's why it's really helpful to understand that every part of our path, every element, every teaching that comes into our field is helpful for a time in the way that it's meant to totally change us from the inside, to point to something that is intuitively known and to help us access that deeper threshold of insight and knowing within ourselves. But once we know it, we need to move on to the next experience that will further our own growth. So there might be a deep cyclic process of moving through different teachers throughout the soul's life, or having a really deep penetrating to a relationship with a particular teacher or cosmology that for a very long part of the soul's life, if not most of it, will become the essential framework through which there will be a deepening and deepening and deepening focal of realization. Right? It's not necessarily so that you'll cycle through many. There can be just one. But the key is, if there is just one, that commitment, Pluto, to a single cosmological orientation and spiritual practice or path, a particular cosmology and teaching or teacher, that single focus commitment will be a commitment to awakening within the soul, right? And it won't be about I'm giving my power away to it. It's going to be I'm going to commit to this, to osmose it, and deeply realize what that teaching is. And we need to differentiate that between what I would say is the majority of the case when we see people committing to a practice. I would say in the majority of cases, at least for many souls for a significant amount of years, there isn't that deep penetrating devotion for personal realization. In some ways, there's that security. Okay, I have my path and I have my practice and I have my beliefs about it. But you can talk to someone and you can really sense if they've kind of like, they have their belief systems. In Zen, this is what we believe, right? Versus the practice of Zen. You can tell if someone's practicing Zen. You can tell if someone's practicing the Tao. If someone's practicing whatever the true meaning of any kind of philosophical practice or spiritual path is, versus believing in that path. And once it becomes a matter of belief, they're doing it, they're living it, but it's not necessarily deeply changing them from within. There can be a deep single commitment to a particular path that becomes the focal point to go deep into the universal truths. It's that particular philosophical framework that the soul will penetrate and go very deeply into in order to understand the universal truths of reality and to realize that from within their own soul. But for them, it's not going to be a belief system as much as a pilgrimage. And how do you know when you found that belief, that practice, that cosmology, that system, that path? You know it when you know it, right? It's the soul knows it. The soul is drawn towards it, right? We're going to feel this irresistible draw, like, oh, there's something I'm really drawn to. And we might stick with it in a deep way for many, many, many years. Or it might be a relationship that we go very deeply into for a while and move on. It's the soul that is in charge, and that's the core of teaching of this series. Everything in this life is determined by desire. The soul brings us into this human experience that we as a soul are playing out through the vehicle of the human experience. And so we're going to be irresistibly attracted to Pluto, that which promises the next step in our evolutionary growth. I gotta get close to this teacher. Now, there can be a lot of shadow and darkness in that. Literally, it can be issues around Pluto, Jupiter. People can have issues around sexuality as it relates to teacher-student dynamic, which is literally just the example of, I want to osmose that, right? Osmosing not the teachings, but the teacher. And then all kinds of confusing power dynamics and entanglements can manifest within that as well. And just the need to, if that teacher sees that I know, then I will see myself and believe myself to be more powerful. We have to also kill the teacher, right? Pluto. We have to let go of the form and the teacher and kind of get to the essence of it so we don't get too attached to any kind of power or entanglement or security dynamic that might arise. So in the attraction of Pluto, we're also going to find ourselves deeply resistant, deeply repulsed by certain philosophies or spiritual frameworks. And those repulsions are going to trigger basically the shadow dynamics within us. Or you might feel really repulsed by, I've seen a lot of Jupiter-Pluto people who have had lifetimes of religious persecution, right? And so they're going to feel really repulsed by religion. Whether or not they grew up with it, they're going to feel, I can't talk to people who are religious. I can't talk to, Christians. I can't deal with dogma, right? Because that is going to reflect the dynamics of dogma, right? And the fixedness of knowing points to something that feels very weak and disempowered within the soul. And the key for the Jupiter-Pluto person is to understand, what is that reflecting within me? What essential power within me is being reflected here that I haven't quite claimed and realized? Because the clarity of our own direct insight and knowing is invulnerable, right? Other people's projections and beliefs can't actually affect our own knowing of the truth, which is silently abiding within. So the repulsion to certain belief systems can also coincide with a sort of like vigilance and missionary to disprove. Like I'm gonna disprove religion, or I'm gonna devote my life to revealing the hypocrisy, which is a good Jupiter word, of religion or of these spiritual teachers, right? These people that will devote their life to pointing out the manipulation, the hypocrisy, and the all the power dynamics that occur within different spiritual practices and teachers and systems. And for them, that's an empowerment, right? It's like they're speaking their truth. Maybe in a different life, they were a part of these systems, or they were abused by these hypocrisies. and they're needing to say, hey, that's not truth. That's a belief system that's taking advantage of you. And the idea of hypocrisy here is, I'm going to teach something, but I'm not going to live it. That's not the higher quality of Jupiter. Jupiter is really about not so much the words we speak, but our living the truth itself, right? It's when we understand more of reality, we're going to live in harmony with it. And our actions and our words are going to be more congruent. It's a way of life. It's a way of being that harmonizes with the laws of reality. But we can speak a bunch of ideas and be very powerful in our speech, which elicits this sense of, I know, I understand, I am powerful, but not even live what we're talking about. Where it's like a meditation teacher, teaching meditation and why it's so, but they don't meditate, right? Or a Christian preacher talking about the importance of sexual purity, but they're not sexually pure themselves. Things like that. Thus, it comes back to, for that individual soul, the need to be honest with oneself. And so there might be a need for many souls this impelling need, right, to point out the dishonesty of other people as a way of them claiming their own power and sort of weeding out these elements that they feel disempowered by. Of course, that's just a stage along their own journey. One of the hardest things for Pluto Jupiter is to be radically honest, like radically honest, okay? So when we speak about radical honesty here, it means I'm going to let go of who you might think I am. I'm going to let go of the image of wisdom and understanding and insight that I might be attached to you having of me, and admit what I don't know. Or admit where I'm struggling with my own faith or my own understanding or my own insight. I'm going to be more sincere. And it ends up being that the most sincere people, they're shattering all of the guru, spiritual teacher, preacher constructs that are supposed to live up to some kind of belief system that pretty much no one actually does live up to. Just sort of being who one is and true to oneself, true to one's shadow, true to where one is actually working out their own content in life, ends up making the teacher a lot more credible, because it's just about being true to the actual present moment experience of realization and insight, which doesn't ever say we have to be something that we're not. But that can be a very hard thing, especially in the patriarchal constructs. Like the distortion of the Jupiter archetype within patriarchy is this like idea of knowing something. Like you have all the answers. Like the whole idea of like the spiritual teacher or the guru is very far removed from what I intuit to be a different expression of the archetype, which is more of the, I don't have the words to express it. The understanding that all of the teachings are found within the natural world or found within nature, and that there are people that are living very simply and they're quiet. They're not like on a pedestal preaching the word of God, right? But we associate this truth with like, I found it and I'm going to convert you. And just take this idea of, we have an idea within so many religions of, I know the answer and other people need to know it too. It's my mission to convert other people. That creates a dynamic where these souls who have the answers are then putting themselves in a position where they need to actually make sure they're living up to something that they've determined to be an ideal that others need to believe as well. If realization and wisdom and knowledge was just sort of a silent experience that was respected through the teachings of nature, there wouldn't be all of this other added stuff of like convincing, So I think that's a really important thing to understand about Jupiter or Pluto. Let's look at some chart examples now. Bill Maher. He's a well-known talk show host, lives in the United States, but he's really outspoken for being, he's a very strong and like fundamentalist atheist, I would call him. He speaks out against religion. He really likes to point out sort of the stupidity of, like, I would say his thing is pointing out for him, what is this? The absolute stupidity of the human species according to the religions that they believe in. Obviously, what do we got here? We got Jupiter, Pluto in Leo in the 11th house. In the 11th house, we're liberating from the herd state, you can say. Right? He's an individuated state soul as well. The group mind, or here, Jupiter, group beliefs. This soul is dealing with the trauma of group belief systems that end up being sort of self-entitled to create all kinds of harm and persecution and pain for all kinds of other groups of people. Right? This is a dynamic that he's working out within his own soul. So let me share a couple Bill Maher quotes that will really just like, it'll bring you into the sort of the I know better than you, and I got to really point out the stupidity of other people who believe these things, quality of that, Leo in the 11th, Pluto Jupiter. So let's face it, God has a big ego problem. Why do we always have to worship him? Religion is insanity by consensus. If you have a few hundred followers and you let some of them molest children, they call you a cult leader. If you have 1 billion, they call you Pope. I think flying planes into a building was a faith-based initiative. I think religion is a neurological disorder, right? He's like using terrorist attacks that come from religious cosmology and linking it to, in general, religion is a neurological disorder. I mean, this is all so descriptive of the strength and the conviction of that Pluto Jupiter. I would say at his stage of evolution, there might be a sort of, and this is a common thing that you'll find in the individuation states, where the soul isn't necessarily orienting towards a spiritual framework of reality that's about understanding the nature of reality, but they're not orienting from a religious cosmological point of view either way. So in general, even spiritual practices or spiritual ideologies will sort of be thrown out along with religion as well. And just any kind of belief system that doesn't fit the rationality of one's understanding will just be seen as absolutely absurd. So he's a really great example of Pluto Jupiter. Let's look at another example. Stephen Wright. Okay, briefly, Stephen Wright is a deadpan comedian. Comedy is a sort of Sagittarius Gemini thing. It's Jupiter Sagittarius from the point of view of a punchline is a spontaneous moment of realization. So follow me here. When you're telling a joke, you're taking people on a journey with you. They're with you. They're open and they're available. They don't know where the joke is going to take you. Like, they don't know where they're going to be led. And there's a certain point where they get to the end. They get to the punchline, which is sort of the point of the whole journey. It's like the arrival. The ability to appreciate humor and building you up for a good punchline, also like telling you a really good story and getting to a really good ending, right? The moral of the story. That's all Jupiter stuff, right? Someone that can tell you a good tale. So I like that he has Jupiter in Virgo conjunct Pluto, but in the 6th house. That's deadpan humor, right? Like Jupiter in Virgo in the 6th, you can say is a sort of self-defeating, I don't have the right word, like messy and sort of decrepit state of insight and humor. So his jokes, just to give you an example, everything he says will be spoken in a sort of like deadpan language, like, hi everyone, just like really like, he'll never smile. And so the humor itself is sort of just like putting everything on the table. And he'll speak to ideas that are they're just so funny because you wouldn't think it, but it's all just Virgo. I just watch some Stephen Wright videos and you'll know exactly what Ari's talking about here. Let me try to think of like 2 of his jokes. My plans to be spontaneous fell through in the last minute. I was driving in a car and I saw a sign that said, rest area, 1 mile. And I thought, wow, they must need a lot of space. Oh, I messed it up. Okay, forget about it. It's like instead of thinking in 1 mile, it's like the rest area is 1 mile. Anyway, okay. So let's move on to the next example. Just a brief reference, just really meaningful to note. Kepler has Jupiter, Pluto. I mean, this guy had a deep, strong spiritual, philosophical like devotion, an amazing contribution to astronomy and science. But I just want to read one quote that I got from Kepler here. Kepler's belief that God created the cosmos in an orderly fashion caused him to attempt to determine and comprehend the laws that govern the natural world. Right? He wanted to get to the bottom line, Jupiter, Pluto. But the Pisces also like a trend. He wanted to get to the transcendent. Like, what are the universal laws that unify all? Right? And here's a quote. Those laws of nature are within the grasp of the human mind. God wanted us to recognize them by creating us after his own image, so that we can share in his own thoughts as well. In his own thoughts. Kepler advocated for tolerance among Christian denominations. For example, arguing that Catholics and Lutherans should be able to take communion together. He wrote, Christ the Lord neither was Lutheran nor Calvinist nor Papist. You can really see the Pisces in the 10th of wanting to unify and bring people together in sort of an ethics and morality that isn't about the judgments of my way is better than yours. So that's a really beautiful example as well. In a lot of these strong Jupiter, Pluto people, they're going to bring forth ideas and insights that are going to have a deep penetrating effect. And sometimes it's going to be very triggering, right? Society will say, oh, that's bad, that's evil, that's wrong. A lot of Jupiter or Pluto people will be on either side of the equation of persecuting others with other belief systems or being persecuted for their beliefs. Okay. Next chart. Let me tell you this. Rilke, I actually haven't even taken the time to find out how to pronounce this person. I've heard of this person. I actually never knew he was a man. I always thought it was a woman. I've never outright made the effort to learn about this person and actually read any of their poetry. I just found my best friend. This morning I was listening to Rilke and I'm like, oh my God, I had no clue. Where were you my whole life? This guy speaks my language. I'm just in love. And it reminds me a lot of the Khalil Gibran, the prophet. So let me read a couple of quotes from Rilke and you'll just totally get what I'm talking about here. And then we'll look at the chart signatures. Be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answer which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. It's like an ode to being with inquiry, to not jumping towards an answer, but staying with the question, staying in the present moment, and the poetry of realization. So there's that silent, inner, contemplative, hermetic quality of Pluto in Taurus in the 9th house, but opposite this Jupiter in Scorpio in the 3rd, a mind that was going very deep and actually communicating words to extract and kind of bring forward this deeper gnosis and knowing of truth and reality. He was all about this unspoken ecstasy and devotion of being in the moment. Let me read one more quote that really elicits just this beautiful opposition. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Wow. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. And let's use this to speak to the opposition a little bit. I always want to give at least one good opposition in these classes. That the orientation that Pluto is wanting to have inward direct realization, right? This is about looking within and knowing the truth. Pluto and Taurus in the 9th. The confrontation of Jupiter in 3rd house Scorpio is questions of the mind that are unresolved, incongruencies, logical premises that aren't clicking. Why is this happening? What's the psychological basis and reality of that? Right? We're faced with that Jupiter draw to understand, but we have to go deeper into our own mind. So that writing process and bringing forth this deep psychological insight has been a way of him transmuting and actually connecting with the knowledge and the wisdom of the soul. It's like the wisdom of the knowledge of the soul isn't like, here's the answer, 42, right? It's not like some sort of concrete, this is the answer to reality, because that's taking a flower and making it into some sort of two-dimensional object. But it's like the flower is the flower and it's the experience of it. He needed to actually get into his experience and bring it into communication, bring it into expression. As I just love that. And Jupiter-Pluto oppositions in general can also be very confrontational, right? Feeling that our understanding is confronted and always kind of being triggered to see our own weakness in understanding or insight. Billy Graham, again, I was thinking last night, I wonder what Billy Graham has. And lo and behold, he has a new phase Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. But just look at all of this ninth house, okay? North Node in the ninth house, conjunct Pallas, Mars, Moon, ruled by that Jupiter, okay? So for those that don't know, Billy Graham was a very famous evangelical, I think Southern Baptist Christian preacher in the United States. For many years, he was well known for just endlessly preaching and teaching, and I think he had a radio program that stuck on for many, many, many years, right? I grew up even just knowing his name. He was all over the place, right? So very big influence. His whole thing was the absolute faith and conviction in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, all that kind of stuff. And his mission was to spread the gospel. You can really see that quality in general, that missionary quality, right? Missionary is Mars in the ninth house, right? And how deeply real it was for him. This is something that was an evolutionary momentum for his soul. The evolutionary edge, in my interpretation, was for him to ultimately empower his path as a teacher, clearly North Node Sag, to keep on going, but to eliminate progressively any kind of dogma or sectarian or alienating thinking that makes the truth alienating or inaccessible to other people. So that Jupiter-Pluto is about, on the one hand, he was a household name, right? Like his preaching was in your house. Many Christians and followers listened to him. But it's also about weeding out emotional assumptions and being able to identify how my beliefs are determined by my own emotional familiarity, and that there are other people that come from different places, different upbringing, where they have a different flavor and taste and experience and smell of home. They're going to know truth in a different way. And so it's both being able to share the conviction of his known, but also evolving his understanding of the truth to become more emotionally available and accessible. I think what made him really popular was the emotional empowerment that he offered to other people. It's a very positive quality of that Pluto in the fourth. And it's sort of a hope and a sense of people felt nourished by his teachings. But there was an edge for him and a growth for him in really being able to identify certain beliefs that actually were an evolutionary push. I would say that he was at the very end of the consensus stages of evolution, moving into the individuated stages. I don't mention this that much here in these classes, but it's a basic understanding in evolutionary astrology that every soul is at a different stage of evolutionary growth. We come into this world at a certain stage and we continue evolving. And when you're in the consensus stage, you're going to be predominantly relating to mainstream religion, mainstream cosmologies, and things like that. But when you're moving into the individuated stages, you're beginning to apprehend more of reality and including more of the fringe components of society that mainstream society judges or excommunicates or doesn't include, or says you have to be like us. So one thing that I found to be really interesting was he was very much against segregation. And there's one instance where there's a preacher at a convention who was pro-segregation. He said, listen, we're going to keep the audience desegregated. Blacks and whites will be together. If you have an issue with that, I'll leave and you can just take this whole thing. Like if you want it segregated, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this with you, right? He became very committed to that. And he became friends with Martin Luther King. And then there was that edge where he also had an experience where he worked with a segregationist, and Martin Luther King was trying to urge him not to, I believe, right? Just think about what it was like to be a mainstream Christian in the 50s, right? It wasn't universally popular in the United States to be anti-segregationist. So that's a big deal for him to be vocal about that. But here's the thing that I found to be most meaningful. This is a new term for me. I've thought about this a lot, which is one thing that I've never understood about, like the whole, you got to convert people that never heard of Jesus, and otherwise they're not gonna be saved. It makes no sense to me. Like this guy that came here to teach about unconditional love, and then somehow we believe that if you don't know about him and don't accept him as your Lord of Savior, you're not gonna be loved, or you're loved but you're gonna go to hell. So that always seemed like a very weird belief system in mainstream religion that I've never been able to wrap my mind around. And I learned a new phrase. So Graham expressed inclusivist views, suggesting that people without explicit faith in Jesus can be saved. And I looked up, here's a quote. I think that everybody that loves or knows Christ, whether they are conscious of it or not, they are members of the body of Christ. God is calling people out of the world for his name. Whether they come from the Muslim world or the Buddhist world or the non-believing world, they are members of the body of Christ because they have been called by God. They may not know the name of Jesus, but they know in their heart that they need something they do not have, and they turn to the only light they have. And I think that they are saved and they are going to be with us in heaven. It's a powerful thing to say. I was really surprised to hear that they may not even know who Jesus is, but they're turning to the only light they have. He's basically saying that light is of God, and that is a part of Christ. And I think that they are saved, and they are going to be with us in heaven. That's not consensus thinking, right? And not a lot of people agreed with that. One guy argued with him, writing from a conservative Protestant standpoint, argues that Graham's concessions are sad words from one who once spoke on the basis of biblical certainties. So, again, you look at that Pluto Jupiter new phase in Cancer in the 4th. His evolutionary directive was to eliminate emotionally alienating belief systems that aren't inclusive, that don't actually say who you are is loved and cared for. Like the quality of care when you put Pluto and Jupiter in the 4th house are belief systems or a spiritual path that wants to love us and care for us and nurture us where we are, right? That's the orientation of his soul, is about caring and nurturing. So he had to follow that and has to continue eliminating and refining his orientations to become more essential to the truth of care and nurturance. Let's see who else I got here. I found a lot of good ones. Okay, honorable mention, Nelson Mandela. It's in the 7th house. Jon Stewart. I've mentioned him before. It got Pluto in the 7th, but it's opposite Jupiter in Pisces in the 1st. Just keep that as an honorable mention. And Bill Gates, another interesting one. Jupiter, Pluto in Leo in the 2nd house. Of course, that speaks to also the potential for massive wealth. One thing to think about too with Jupiter, Pluto in general, since Jupiter exaggerates anything it touches from a Jupiter point of view, Jupiter, Pluto can also speak to the exaggeration of all kinds of unconscious psychological dynamics, right? Like, we might exaggerate and really blow up whatever our desires are. And Jupiter will be like, I want more of that, right? We can go overboard. This is an important thing I didn't think about to speak. Like Jupiter, Pluto can go overboard, going too far because they really want it. And it's where they're going to keep, right? Because Jupiter has this issue with not having appropriate limits. That's like the issue with Jupiter, putting on more than you can actually integrate, holding more than you can actually internalize, and loading your plate with more. And so it all falls, it all collapses. There can be an issue with Jupiter, Pluto, and not really knowing how to stop, but just sort of being endlessly opportunistic, which from a Pluto point of view is going to be, oh, here's another opportunity. There's something more there that I want, that I'm going to osmose, that will make me more powerful. So that's an important thing to understand about Jupiter, Pluto in general. Okay, let me see if there are any questions in the comments. Does Jupiter being retrograde change the story in any way? So Jupiter retrograde and retrograde in general is going to basically, for each individual case, is going to be different. But the archetype is going to speak to a need to more deeply internalize that planetary function and thus sort of step away from the conditioned patterns relative to that planetary function for that individual soul. So we're internalizing it more deeply, and thus that internalization has the effect of accelerating our own evolutionary growth. So there might be, I need to kind of look at my existing belief systems, right? And we're going to be drawn more deeply to question that. Or we might find ourselves on the other end of that. Like, you can come into this life deeply reflective of your beliefs, right? Or there can be, on the other end, an orientation of just sort of assuming things to be true and being very self-convinced and dogmatic, and that retrograde function is going to say in this lifetime you're going to be drawn to look at that, right? Your life journey is going to take you to kind of unravel these Jupiter belief systems and dogmas. So we always have to see retrograde and understand it on an individual context, but on the most basic level, it serves a point of bringing the soul more deeply within to uncover that function within. Okay. Once again, I am available for sessions. I offer intuitive guidance sessions with astrology in service to your own soul growth. I work with individuals and couples, and I do long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. On my website, I have a classes page with many, many classes and products, including the current training program, which just began. Enrollment is open for a little longer. You could also enroll in the self-study, and anything that you want to study. There are many, many topics and areas of evolutionary astrology and soul work on my website. So definitely check that out if you're interested in going deeper. And as always, thank you for watching. We will come back next week for Pluto Saturn. Till next time.